When my mother decided to hand over my entire inheritance to my spoiled cousin Rachel, she thought she held all the cards. What she didn't know was that I owned the very house she was living in and had been secretly paying her mortgage for 3 years.
I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Marcus, and this story begins 3 years ago when I was working as a senior marketing coordinator at Pinnacle Digital Solutions in downtown Seattle. It wasn't my dream job, but it paid well enough to cover my studio apartment in Capitol Hill and my weekend hiking adventures in the Cascades. More importantly, it had given me something I'd been desperately seeking since college: stability. The company specialized in digital marketing campaigns for mid-sized businesses, and I'd worked my way up from an entry-level position over 4 years. My boss, Sandra Chen, was notoriously demanding, but fair. She expected excellence, and in return, she rewarded hard work with real opportunities for advancement. Under her guidance, I'd learned more about digital strategy and client relations than any university course could have taught me. My best friend Tyler Walsh had been struggling to find his footing since we'd graduated from the University of Washington. While I'd landed my first job relatively quickly, Tyler had bounced between different positions: a stint at a local coffee roasting company, a few months at a startup that folded, some freelance graphic design work that never quite paid the bills. We'd been friends since we were 12 when his family moved to our neighborhood in Bellevue, and I'd watched him cycle through jobs with a mixture of sympathy and growing concern. Tyler was brilliant, don't get me wrong. He had this creative energy that I'd always admired, the kind of person who could walk into a room and immediately see possibilities that others missed. But he'd also developed a pattern of burning bridges wherever he went. There was always a story. His boss was unreasonable, the company culture was toxic, his coworkers were incompetent. After the third job ended badly, I started to wonder if maybe Tyler was the common denominator in these situations. One Thursday evening in October, Tyler called me sounding more desperate than I had ever heard him. His latest gig, doing social media for a local restaurant, had ended abruptly when he'd gotten into an argument with the owner about creative direction. He was 3 months behind on rent and facing eviction from his shared house in Fremont. "Marcus, I need your help," he said, his voice tight with stress. "I know Pinnacle is hiring for that junior marketing position. I've been following their job postings, and I think I'd be perfect for it." I knew the position he was talking about. Sandra had mentioned they were looking for someone to join our team, someone who could handle the more routine tasks while the senior staff focused on strategic planning. The pay wasn't spectacular, but it would be steady income, and Tyler desperately needed that kind of stability. "I can put in a good word for you," I offered. "But you know Sandra. She's going to want to see a solid portfolio and references from your previous jobs." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "That's the thing. Some of my previous situations, they didn't end on the best terms. But if you could vouch for me, tell her about my skills and work ethic, maybe that would be enough to get me an interview." I agreed to help, though something in Tyler's tone made me uneasy. The next day, I mentioned to Sandra that I had a friend who might be interested in the junior position. I kept my recommendation measured. I talked about Tyler's creative abilities and his familiarity with design software, but I didn't oversell him. Sandra seemed intrigued enough to ask Tyler to submit his application. 2 weeks later, Sandra approached me with Tyler's resume in hand. "Your friend has had some interesting experiences," she said. "I'd like to bring him in for an interview next Friday. Can you give me a bit more background on him?" This is when Tyler's plan began to unravel, though I wouldn't realize it for months. Sandra started asking specific questions about Tyler's work history. She'd done her homework, clearly researching his previous employers. When she mentioned the restaurant where he'd most recently worked, I felt confident talking about his social media skills. But then she brought up his time at Morrison and Associates, a marketing firm I'd never heard Tyler mention. He speaks very highly of his experience there, Sandra said, consulting the resume. Says he was responsible for managing client relations and developing comprehensive marketing strategies. That's exactly the kind of background we're looking for, even at the junior level. I nodded along, though I felt a growing knot in my stomach. Tyler had never mentioned working at Morrison and Associates. In fact, during the time period listed on his resume, I remember him doing freelance graphic design from his bedroom, complaining constantly about how difficult it was to find legitimate clients. The interview went well, from what I could tell. Sandra seemed impressed with Tyler's portfolio, and he clearly knew how to present himself professionally when the situation called for it. A week later, she offered him the position, starting at a salary that was actually higher than what I'd been expecting for a junior role. "Your recommendation really carried weight," Sandra told me privately. "I can see why you spoke so highly of him. His experience at Morrison and Associates gives him exactly the kind of client-facing background we need." Tyler started the following Monday, and for the first few weeks, everything seemed to be going smoothly. He was enthusiastic, asked good questions, and threw himself into learning our systems and processes. Sandra made several positive comments about how quickly he was picking things up, and I felt genuinely proud of having helped my best friend get back on his feet. But then small things began to feel off. Tyler would reference experiences and projects that didn't align with what I knew about his work history. During team meetings, he'd mention challenges he'd supposedly overcome at Morrison, describing complex client situations that seemed far beyond what a junior employee would typically handle. When I asked him about it privately, he'd brush off my questions or change the subject. The turning point came 6 weeks after Tyler started. Sandra called me into her office on a Tuesday morning, and I could tell from her expression that something was seriously wrong. She had Tyler's resume spread out on her desk alongside several printed emails. "Marcus, I need to ask you about your friend's background," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "I've been trying to verify some of the information on his resume, and I'm running into some problems." My heart sank as she explained what her research had uncovered. Morrison and Associates existed, but they had no record of Tyler ever working there. The phone number he had provided as a reference connected to a disconnected line. Even more damaging, Sandra had reached out to contacts in the local marketing community and discovered that Tyler had a reputation for embellishing his experience and leaving jobs under questionable circumstances. She said, "The thing that concerns me the most is that he claimed you could verify his experience at Morrison and Associates. He told me during the interview that you two had discussed his work there extensively." I felt the blood drain from my face. Tyler hadn't just lied on his resume. He'd used my friendship and credibility as cover for his deception. Worse, he'd made me an unwitting accomplice in his lies by suggesting I could verify experiences that had never happened. "Sandra, I had no idea," I said, and I could hear the strain in my own voice. "Tyler never mentioned working at Morrison and Associates to me. I recommended him based on what I knew about his skills and potential, not any specific work experience." Sandra studied my face for a long moment, but she looked very, very disappointed.
Sandra gave Tyler until the end of the week to provide legitimate references and documentation for his claimed experience, though we both knew he wouldn't be able to produce anything real. The conversation I was dreading with my best friend was inevitable, and I had no idea how I was going to confront him about what he'd done to both of us. That evening, I sat in my apartment staring at my phone, trying to figure out how to approach Tyler. Part of me wanted to give him a chance to explain, to hope there was some misunderstanding that could clear everything up. But deep down, I already knew the truth. The pieces fit together too perfectly. His evasiveness about his work history, the mysterious references to experiences he'd never shared with me, the way he deflected my questions. I finally texted him around 9 p.m. "We need to talk. Can you come over?" He arrived 20 minutes later with a six-pack of our usual beer and that easy smile that had gotten him out of trouble countless times before. But I could see something different in his eyes, a wariness that hadn't been there in the morning. "What's up, man?" he asked, settling onto my couch as if this was just another casual hangout. "You sounded serious." I didn't waste time with small talk. "Sandra knows about Morrison and Associates." Tyler's entire body went still. The beer he'd been opening slipped from his hands, foam spilling across my coffee table. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he let out a shaky laugh. "Okay, so maybe I embellished some details on my resume. Everyone does that, right? It's not like I claim to have a PhD or something." "You created an entire fake job, Tyler. A fake company history, fake references, fake experiences. And you told Sandra that I could verify it all?" My voice was rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "Do you have any idea what you could have done to my career?" Tyler ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I'd seen him make since we were kids whenever he was caught in something he couldn't talk his way out of. "Marcus, listen. I can explain." "Then explain. Explain how you thought it was okay to use my friendship as collateral for your lies." He was quiet for a long time, staring at the spilled beer on my table. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I was desperate. You don't understand what it's like to be constantly rejected, to have doors slam in your face because of stupid mistakes from years ago. I needed this job, and I knew I could do the work if someone just gave me a chance. So you decided to drag me down with you?" "No, that's not—" Tyler stood up abruptly, pacing to my window. "I never meant for it to affect you. I thought I could just prove myself through my work, and eventually none of the resume stuff would matter. People would see what I could do." "But that's not how the real world works, Tyler. Trust matters. Integrity matters. And you've completely destroyed both."
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. He spun around to face me, and I saw something I'd never seen in his eyes before. Genuine panic. "What did you tell Sandra? Did you throw me under the bus?" The question hit me like a physical blow. After everything he'd done, he was worried about whether I'd betrayed him. I told her the truth, that I had no idea about Morrison and Associates, and that I'd recommended you based on what I actually knew about your abilities. "So I still have a chance to fix this?" I stared at him in disbelief. "Fix this? Tyler, you lied about your entire professional background. You used my name to legitimize fraud. There's no fixing this." "Come on, Marcus. You know how good I am at thinking on my feet. I can come up with something." "Stop." I held up my hand. "Just stop. I'm not going to sit here and help you dig yourself deeper into this hole." Tyler's expression hardened. "Right, because you've never made a mistake. You've never bent the truth to get ahead. I've never committed fraud and then asked my best friend to be my accomplice." "I never asked you to be my accomplice. I just needed someone to believe in me for once." "Someone to believe in you? Or someone to provide cover for your lies? Because there's a difference, Tyler, and I'm starting to think you don't understand that." The argument escalated from there. Tyler accused me of being self-righteous, of never understanding the pressure he was under. I accused him of being a pathological liar who couldn't take responsibility for his actions. We said things to each other that 15 years of friendship should have prevented. Words that felt like they were burning bridges we'd never be able to rebuild. Finally, Tyler grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. "You know what, Marcus? Maybe this friendship has run its course anyway. You've always looked down on me, always acted like you had everything figured out while I was just stumbling around making mistakes. That's not true, isn't it?" He paused with his hand on the doorknob. "Right, because you recommended me for this job like you were doing charity work, like you were helping the poor, struggling friend who couldn't make it on his own." I recommended you because I cared about you, because I wanted to see you succeed. Well, congratulations. You got to feel good about yourself, and now you get to feel even better about being the righteous one when it all falls apart. The door slammed behind me with a finality that seemed to echo through my entire apartment. The next morning, I arrived at work early, hoping to catch Sandra before the day officially began. I found her in her office, already reviewing reports with her usual coffee and focused intensity. "Marcus," she said when she saw me, "I was hoping we could talk. Have you had any contact with Tyler since yesterday?" "We spoke last night. He couldn't provide any legitimate explanation for the Morrison and Associates situation." Sandra nodded, unsurprised. "I figured as much. I've already started the paperwork to terminate his employment. He'll be asked to clear out his desk this afternoon." I felt a complicated mix of relief and sadness. "Sandra, I want to apologize again for any role I played in this situation. I should have been more thorough in verifying his background before making any recommendations." "Marcus, you acted in good faith based on information you believe to be true. That's what references are supposed to be, honest assessments from people who know the candidate's work. Tyler exploited your trust and friendship in a way that reflects entirely on his character, not yours." Her words should have been comforting, but I still felt the weight of responsibility. "Will this affect my position here? My credibility?" Sandra was quiet for a moment, considering. "Your work speaks for itself, and your integrity over the past 4 years is established. This incident doesn't change my assessment of your professional judgment. However, I would suggest being more cautious about personal recommendations in the future. Sometimes the people closest to us are the hardest to see clearly." The firing happened quietly that afternoon. Tyler cleared out his desk while most of the team was in meetings, avoiding the awkwardness of extended goodbyes or explanations. I watched from my cubicle as he packed up his few personal items, part of me wanting to go over and say something, but not knowing what words could possibly bridge the gap that had opened between us. He left without saying goodbye to anyone, including me. Over the next few weeks, I kept expecting him to reach out, to apologize, to try to repair the damage, or at least acknowledge what his actions had cost both of us, but my phone stayed silent. Mutual friends mentioned seeing him around town, apparently back to his pattern of odd jobs and temporary arrangements, but he seemed to be avoiding our usual haunts and social circles. I threw myself into work, taking on additional projects and responsibilities, as if professional success could somehow fill the void left by a friendship that had imploded so spectacularly. Sandra noticed my increased dedication and began giving me more complex assignments, preparing me for what she hinted might be a promotion opportunity in the new year. But even as my career trajectory improved, I found myself grappling with questions that went deeper than professional consequences. How well had I really known Tyler? Had there been signs of this kind of behavior that I'd ignored or rationalized away? And perhaps most troubling, if he could lie so easily about something this significant, what else about our friendship had been built on deception? The holidays came and went without any contact between us. New Year's Eve felt particularly hollow. We'd spent every December 31st together since we were teenagers, usually engaging in increasingly elaborate traditions and inside jokes that had accumulated over the years. Instead, I found myself at a house party thrown by coworkers, making small talk with people who knew nothing about the complicated history I was trying to move past. I thought the worst was behind me. I thought the silence meant Tyler had moved on, maybe even learned something from the experience. I thought our friendship was simply over, ended by his betrayal and our mutual inability to bridge the gap it had created. I had no idea that the most audacious part of Tyler's behavior was still to come. 3 months passed in relative peace. I had settled into a routine that didn't include Tyler, and while I occasionally felt the phantom ache of a friendship that had been severed so abruptly, I was beginning to accept that some bridges, once burned, simply couldn't be rebuilt.
My work performance had never been better, and Sandra had hinted that a senior marketing strategist position might be opening up in the spring. Then, on a rainy Tuesday morning in March, my phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. My stomach dropped when I saw his name on the screen. "Hey Marcus, hope you're doing well. Could we grab coffee sometime? I have something important to discuss with you." I stared at the message for 10 minutes before responding. Part of me was curious about what could possibly be so important that Tyler would break months of silence. A larger part was suspicious about his motives. But ultimately, 15 years of shared history won out over my better judgment. Coffee Corner on Pine Street, Thursday at 2 p.m. Coffee Corner was neutral territory, a busy cafe in Capitol Hill where we'd spent countless hours during college, but far enough from both our current lives that we wouldn't risk running into people who knew our situation. I arrived early and chose a table in the back corner, positioning myself where I could see Tyler approach. He walked in looking better than I had expected. His clothes were nicer than usual, and he carried himself with a confidence that seemed genuine, rather than the forced bravado I'd grown accustomed to seeing from him. He spotted me immediately and walked over with that same easy smile, though I noticed it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Marcus, thanks for meeting me," he said, sliding into the chair across from me. "You look good, man. Work treating you well?" "It's going fine," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "What did you want to discuss?" Tyler ordered an elaborate coffee drink while I nursed the black coffee I'd been drinking since he arrived. He seemed nervous, fidgeting with sugar packets and avoiding direct eye contact. Finally, after several minutes of uncomfortable small talk about the weather and mutual acquaintances, he got to the point. "I've been doing some serious self-reflection since everything happened at Pinnacle. I know I made some mistakes, and I know things ended badly between us. But I've been working on myself, trying to understand why I made those choices." I waited for him to continue, not trusting myself to respond with sarcasm. The thing is, I've had some time to really think about what I want to do with my life, and I've realized that marketing is genuinely where my passion lies. Not just the creative side, but the strategic thinking, the client relationships, all of it. "Okay," I said slowly, wondering where this conversation was heading. "So, I've been applying for positions at some really great companies. There's this amazing opportunity at Digital Horizon. They're a boutique agency that works with tech startups, exactly the kind of cutting-edge work I've always wanted to do." Digital Horizon. I knew the company well. They had an excellent reputation in Seattle's marketing community, and their client list included some of the most innovative companies in the Pacific Northwest. Landing a position there would be a significant step up from anything Tyler had done before. "The interview process has been going really well," Tyler continued, his enthusiasm seeming to build as he talked. "The creative director said my portfolio was one of the strongest they'd seen for this level of position." "That's great, Tyler," I said, though I was beginning to suspect where this conversation was heading. "The thing is, they want to do a final reference check before making their offer. They need someone who can speak to my professional abilities and work ethic. Preferably someone in the industry who has seen me in action." There it was. I felt anger rising in my chest, hot and immediate. "You want me to give you a reference?" "I know how it sounds," Tyler said quickly, leaning forward across the table. "But hear me out. You've seen what I can do when I'm focused. You know I have the skills for this kind of work, and honestly, you're one of the only people in marketing who knows my capabilities and would be willing to speak for me."
This logic would have been merely frustrating if it applied only to current family resources. But Mom was clearly planning to extend this reasoning to Grandpa's inheritance, treating his lifetime of savings as a fund designated for Rachel's uncertain ventures, rather than a legacy to be divided according to his wishes. The stage was being set for a conflict that would test every relationship in our family, and I was about to discover just how far Mom was willing to go to ensure Rachel's priority treatment, even if it meant completely disregarding legal documents and family fairness. Grandpa Henry's death came suddenly on a Tuesday morning in March. At 83, he'd been slowing down, but was still driving to his auto shop 3 days a week and maintaining his independence. The heart attack that took him was massive and mercifully quick. He died in his sleep with no suffering. I learned about his passing from a voicemail Mom left at 6:47 a.m. Her voice was shaky but controlled as she delivered the basic facts. Grandpa had been found by his neighbor, the paramedics confirmed he'd been gone for several hours, and the family was gathering at Mom's house to make arrangements. The funeral planning revealed sides of my family I'd never fully grasped. Mom immediately took charge of every detail, presenting herself as the primary decision-maker despite having two siblings who lived closer to Grandpa and had maintained more regular contact with him. Her first priority wasn't grief counseling or memorial planning, it was securing Grandpa's important documents. "We need to make sure everything is properly organized," Mom announced to the gathered family members. Grandpa would have wanted his affairs handled efficiently and fairly. That word, fairly, would become a weapon over the following weeks. Rachel flew back from Los Angeles for the funeral, her return funded by yet another emergency transfer from Mom. During the viewing, she performed grief with the same dramatic flair she brought to everything else, sobbing loudly and requiring multiple family members to comfort her. Several people commented on how close she and Grandpa had been, though I couldn't remember them having a substantial conversation in years. The funeral itself was beautiful and well attended. Grandpa had been respected in his community, and his auto shop employees served as pallbearers alongside family members. But even during the service, I noticed Mom whispering urgently with Aunt Patricia about practical matters that need immediate attention. Those practical matters centered on Grandpa's will, which was scheduled to be read the following Friday at his attorney's office. Mom had somehow convinced herself that as the eldest child, she should have input into how the inheritance was distributed, regardless of what the actual document specified. Grandpa made his will years ago, she explained to me after the burial. He couldn't have anticipated how much Rachel's situation would change, or how much support she needs right now. We have to consider what he would have wanted if he'd known about her business and her move to California. This logic was deeply flawed on multiple levels, but Mom had convinced herself that she was protecting Grandpa's true intentions rather than undermining them. She'd also been in regular contact with Rachel throughout the week, having long phone conversations that always ended with Mom looking more determined and resolute. The will reading took place in the conference room of Sullivan & Associates, the law firm that had handled Grandpa's business affairs for over 20 years. Present were Mom, her two siblings, Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia, Rachel, myself, and 3 cousins from my uncle's families. Attorney James Sullivan was a man in his 60s who had clearly delivered many such readings over his career. He opened with condolences and a brief explanation of the legal process before getting to the substance of Grandpa's final wishes. The will was comprehensive and carefully crafted. Grandpa had left specific bequests to several charities, modest gifts to longtime employees, and provisions for maintaining his gravesite. But the bulk of his estate, valued at approximately $1.2 million, was to be divided equally among his 6 grandchildren. Each grandchild would receive roughly $200,000 after taxes and administrative expenses. The distribution was clean, simple, and explicitly equal. There were no conditions, no performance requirements, and no provisions for adjusting amounts based on perceived need or circumstances. The room fell silent as Attorney Sullivan finished reading the relevant sections. Mom's face had gone pale, and I could see her jaw clenching as she processed the implications of true equal treatment. "That's it?" Mom asked, her voice tight. "There's no flexibility in the distribution? No consideration for different circumstances among the beneficiaries?" Attorney Sullivan looked puzzled by the question. "Mrs. Thompson, your father was very clear about his wishes. He specifically requested equal distribution among all grandchildren. He felt this was the fairest approach." Mom's reaction was immediate and intense. But this was written years ago. He couldn't have known that Rachel would be starting a business in California, that she'd need capital to establish herself. Marcus has a stable career. He doesn't need this money the way Rachel does. The attorney maintained his professional composure, but I could see he was uncomfortable with the direction of Mom's comments. "I understand this may not align with current family circumstances, but I'm legally obligated to execute the will as written. Your father was of sound mind when he created this document, and it reflects his explicit wishes."
So you're just going to abandon me when I need you most? I'm not abandoning you. I'm refusing to be an accomplice to fraud. There's a difference. Tyler's mask finally slipped completely. Fine. But don't expect me to forget this, Marcus. When you needed me over the years, I was always there for you. The least you could do is return the favor. When I needed you, I never asked you to lie for me. I left him sitting at the table, his expensive coffee growing cold as he stared at his phone screen. As I walked back to my car, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for the friendship that had truly ended that day, and relief that Tyler had finally shown me exactly who he'd become. Or maybe who he'd always been, beneath the surface I'd chosen not to look too closely at. But I had no idea that Tyler wasn't done trying to drag me into his mess. The conversation at Coffee Corner was just the beginning of a campaign that would test every boundary I thought I'd established. I thought my firm rejection at Coffee Corner would be the end of it. Tyler had always been persistent, but he had also been pragmatic enough to recognize when a situation was truly hopeless. I assumed he would find another way to handle his reference situation, possibly by being honest with Digital Horizon or finding someone else to vouch for him. I was wrong. The text messages started the next day. At first, they seemed almost reasonable. Tyler asking me to, quote, reconsider and, quote, think about what our friendship meant, unquote. But as the hours passed, the messages became more frequent and increasingly desperate. Tyler, I know you're angry, but this job could change everything for me. Please, just think about it. I've been up all night thinking about our conversation. Maybe we could meet again and find a compromise. Digital Horizon is expecting your call by tomorrow. I told them you were traveling for work this week, but they're getting impatient. That last message made my blood run cold. Tyler was still telling people I had agreed to provide a reference, despite my explicit refusal. He was buying himself time while continuing to use my name in his application process. I called him immediately. Tyler, you need to stop. I told you clearly that I'm not giving you a reference. Marcus, listen. No, you listen. Stop telling Digital Horizon that I'm going to call them. Stop using my name in your job application. This ends now. You're being unreasonable. All I need is a 5-minute phone call where you confirm that I'm capable of doing good work. Is that really too much to ask? Yes, it is too much to ask, because it would be a lie. How would it be a lie? You saw me work at Pinnacle. You know I was doing well before everything fell apart. The circular nature of his logic was exhausting. Tyler, I'm hanging up now. Do not contact me again about this. But he didn't stop. The messages continued throughout the week, becoming more manipulative with each passing day. Tyler began bringing up specific memories from our friendship, times when he'd helped me through difficult periods, favors he'd done for me over the years, moments when his support had meant everything to me. Remember when your dad was in the hospital junior year and I drove you to Spokane every weekend for 2 months? I never asked for anything in return. You crashed at my place for 3 weeks when you first moved to Seattle. I didn't hesitate to help you when you needed it. I was the best man at your cousin's wedding when you got food poisoning. I stepped up because that's what friends do for each other. Each message was a weaponized memory designed to make me feel guilty for not reciprocating his past support. The emotional manipulation was so transparent, it made me angry, but it was also effective in a way that surprised me. Despite everything Tyler had done, despite his continued dishonesty and boundary violations, part of me still felt the pull of 15 years of shared history. On Thursday evening, Tyler showed up at my apartment building. I was coming home from the gym when I found him sitting in the lobby, chatting casually with Mrs. Rodriguez, my elderly neighbor, as if he belonged there. Marcus, perfect timing, he said, standing up with that practiced smile. I was hoping we could continue our conversation from yesterday. Mrs. Rodriguez beamed at me. Your friend was just telling me about the wonderful job opportunity he has. He seems so excited about it. I forced a smile and nodded, not wanting to create a scene in front of my neighbor. Tyler, could I speak with you outside? Once we were on the sidewalk, I turned to face him. What are you doing here?
I needed to see you in person. Phone calls and text messages aren't working, and I think there's been some miscommunication between us. There's been no miscommunication. I told you clearly that I won't provide a reference, and I told you to stop contacting me about it. But you haven't heard my new proposal, Tyler said, pulling out his phone. I've been thinking about this all wrong. Instead of asking you to focus on just the work you saw at Pinnacle, what if we expanded the reference to include things you knew about my abilities before I even got that job? He showed me notes he'd apparently made about our college years, listing projects we'd worked on together, skills he'd demonstrated in group assignments, even volunteer work we'd done for various campus organizations. See? There's a whole foundation of experience you could speak to that has nothing to do with what happened at Pinnacle. You could honestly say you've known me for 15 years and observed my work ethic and capabilities in multiple contexts. The notes were detailed and surprisingly well organized. Tyler had clearly spent significant time crafting this alternative approach, finding ways to leverage our long friendship into professional credibility. It was manipulative, but it was also clever in a way that made me understand how he'd talked his way into and out of so many situations over the years. Tyler, even if some of those things are technically true, you're still asking me to present them in a misleading way. You're asking me to help you get a job by focusing on college projects from 10 years ago instead of your recent professional behavior. I'm asking you to present a complete picture of who I am, not just the worst moment of my career. The worst moment of your career was also a betrayal of our friendship. How do you not understand why that matters? Tyler's expression shifted, becoming more aggressive than I'd seen since our argument in my apartment months earlier. You know what I think, Marcus? I think you like feeling superior to me. I think you enjoy watching me struggle because it makes you feel better about your own life. That's not true, isn't it? You've always been the responsible one, the one with the stable job and the clear path forward. Maybe part of you is glad that I'm still struggling because it validates your choices. Tyler, you're projecting. I've tried to help you multiple times over the years, including recommending you for the Pinnacle job that started this whole mess. And now I'm asking for your help again, and you're refusing. What does that tell you about what kind of friend you really are? The conversation was spiraling into familiar territory. Tyler deflecting responsibility by attacking my character and motivations. I'd seen this pattern play out in his descriptions of previous jobs and relationships, but I'd never been on the receiving end of it myself. I'm not going to stand here and let you manipulate me into feeling guilty for maintaining my boundaries, I said. Find another reference, Tyler. There have to be other people in your life who can speak to your abilities. Like who? My last 3 employers who all have negative things to say about me? College professors I haven't spoken to in 8 years? My family who think I'm a professional failure? The desperation in his voice was genuine, and for a moment I felt a flicker of the sympathy that had driven me to help him in the first place. But then I remembered the lies, the manipulation, the way he'd used my friendship as cover for his deception. That's not my problem to solve, I said firmly. I'm sorry your professional relationships haven't worked out, but that's a consequence of choices you've made repeatedly over the years. So you're just going to abandon me after everything we've been through together? I'm not abandoning you. I'm refusing to participate in a pattern of behavior that's destructive for both of us. Tyler stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him calculating his next move. Finally, he pulled out his phone and showed me another message thread. Digital Horizon called me today. They said they haven't been able to reach you and they're concerned about moving forward without completing their reference checks. They've given me until Monday to provide an alternative contact, or they're going to withdraw their offer. Then you need to provide an alternative contact. There is no alternative contact, Marcus. You're literally the only person in a professional context who could give me a positive reference. If you don't make this call, I will lose the job. The ultimatum was clear, and Tyler seemed to believe it would finally compel me to give in.
He was betting that our shared history and my natural inclination to help people would override my objections to his behavior. He was wrong. Then you lose the job, I said. I'm sorry it's come to that, but I won't compromise my integrity to fix problems you've created for yourself. Tyler's face went through a series of expressions: disbelief, anger, and finally something cold and calculating that I'd never seen directed at me before.
Fine, he said quietly. But don't think this conversation is over, Marcus. I've invested too much in this opportunity to let it slip away because of your self-righteousness. He walked away without another word, leaving me standing on the sidewalk with a growing sense of unease. Tyler's final comment felt less like a frustrated outburst and more like a threat. I had the distinct feeling that his campaign to get me to provide the reference was about to escalate in ways I hadn't anticipated. I was right to be worried. Tyler's ominous parting words replayed in my mind all weekend, but I convinced myself I was overthinking things. He was frustrated and desperate, but surely he wouldn't do anything truly destructive. We'd been friends for too long, shared too much history. Even at his worst, Tyler had never been vindictive. Monday morning shattered that illusion completely. I arrived at Pinnacle to find Sandra waiting by my desk with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of confusion, concern, and barely contained anger. She was holding a printed email in her hand, and I could see my name mentioned several times in the visible text. Marcus, we need to talk. My office, now. The walk to her office felt like a death march. Other employees glanced up from their desks as we passed, and I could sense that something significant had happened. Sandra closed the door behind us and gestured for me to sit down. I received an interesting email this morning, she began, settling behind her desk with the printed pages spread in front of her. It's from someone claiming to be a concerned colleague who wanted to alert me to what they describe as ongoing professional misconduct involving you and Tyler Walsh. My stomach dropped. What kind of misconduct? Sandra picked up the first page and began reading. According to this anonymous message, you and Tyler had been conspiring together long before he applied for the position here. A writer claims you helped Tyler fabricate his resume, specifically the Morrison and Associates experience, and that you coached him on how to present false information during his interview. The blood drained from my face. Sandra, that's completely untrue. I had no idea about Morrison and Associates until you brought it to my attention. I know that, Marcus, but let me finish. She moved to the second page. The email goes on to claim that since Tyler's termination, you've been providing positive references for him to other employers, including something called Digital Horizon, despite knowing about his fraudulent background. That's also false. I explicitly refuse to provide Tyler with any references. The writer seems to have quite a bit of specific information. They mention exact dates of alleged conversations between you and Tyler, details about his current job applications, even quotes from what they claim were phone calls you made on his behalf. I felt sick. Tyler had somehow transformed our private conversations into evidence of a conspiracy that had never existed. Worse, he'd created detailed fiction about reference calls I never made, weaving together enough real information to make his lies seem credible. Sandra, I swear to you, none of this is true. Tyler has been trying to get me to provide references for him, but I've refused every time. I can show you the text messages where I explicitly told him no. I believe you, Marcus, but her tone was careful. However, this puts both of us in a difficult position. Someone took considerable time and effort to craft this accusation, and they clearly have inside information about Tyler's situation and your interactions with him. The implication was clear. Tyler had sent the email himself, using details from our conversations to create a fictional narrative that painted me as his accomplice in ongoing fraud. It was brilliant in its viciousness. Even though Sandra believed me, the mere existence of such detailed accusations would raise questions about my judgment and integrity. What happens now? I asked. I forwarded this to HR and legal. They'll want to conduct a formal investigation, which means they'll likely interview you, review your communications with Tyler,
and possibly contact Digital Horizon to verify whether you actually provided any references. And until then? Sandra hesitated. Until then, you'll continue your normal duties, but I have to advise you to have no further contact with Tyler Walsh. Any communication at all could be seen as evidence of the conspiracy described in this email. I left Sandra's office feeling like I had been hit by a truck. Tyler hadn't just escalated his manipulation, he'd weaponized it, turning our friendship and his desperate job search into an attack on my professional reputation. The genius of his approach was that even proving my innocence would require me to discuss our private conversations and explain his behavior, making me look either naive or complicit. The HR interview happened that afternoon. Janet Collins, Pinnacle's head of human resources, was professional but thorough, asking detailed questions about my relationship with Tyler, the timeline of his job application and termination, and any subsequent communications we'd had.
"Can you walk me through your interactions with Mr. Walsh since his termination?" she asked, taking notes on a legal pad. I explained the coffee meeting, Tyler's request for a reference, my refusal, and his subsequent harassment through text messages, and the uninvited visit to my apartment. Janet asked to see the text messages, and I handed over my phone willingly. "These messages seem to support your account," she said after scrolling through them. "Mr. Walsh is clearly asking for a reference, and you're clearly refusing. But the anonymous email claims you eventually agreed and made several calls on his behalf." I never made any calls. I never agreed to anything. Tyler was frustrated by my refusal and apparently decided to create this fictional narrative to, punish me for not helping him. "Have you had any contact with Digital Horizon or any other companies regarding Mr. Walsh?" "None whatsoever." Janet made a note. "We'll be verifying that independently. If what you're telling me is accurate, this appears to be a case of harassment and false accusations. However, I need to advise you that until our investigation is complete, any appearance of impropriety could affect your employment here." The message was clear. Even though I was innocent, Tyler's accusations had created a cloud of suspicion that would hang over me until the company could definitively prove his claims were false. That evening, my phone rang. Tyler's name appeared on the screen, and after a moment of hesitation, I answered. "You son of a bitch," I said without preamble. "Marcus, I was hoping you'd pick up. Did you have an interesting day at work?" The casual tone of his voice was infuriating. "You sent that email to Sandra." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Cut the crap, Tyler! Anonymous email detailing a conspiracy between us? Only you could have written that." Anonymous email. That does sound intriguing. What did it say?" "You know exactly what it said because you wrote it. The question is why you thought destroying my career would somehow help yours." Tyler was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost its mock-innocent tone. "You destroyed my career first, Marcus. I offered you multiple chances to help me, to be the friend I needed you to be, and you chose self-righteousness over loyalty. So this is revenge? These are consequences? You think you can just wash your hands of 15 years of friendship because I made some mistakes? You think you can abandon me when I need you most and not face any repercussions? Tyler, what you did goes way beyond making mistakes. You committed fraud, you lied to get a job, and now you're trying to destroy my reputation because I won't help you do it again. I'm trying to show you what it feels like to have your professional credibility questioned. I'm giving you a taste of the stress and uncertainty I've been living with for months. By making false accusations that could cost my job? By creating a situation where you might finally understand what I'm going through. Maybe now you'll be more motivated to help me resolve this Digital Horizon situation. The transactional nature of his thinking was staggering. Tyler had escalated from manipulation to sabotage,
all while maintaining that his behavior was somehow justified by my refusal to participate in his deception. This is not going to work, Tyler. Pinnacle is going to investigate your claims. They're going to find out you're lying, and you're going to face legal consequences for harassment and filing false accusations. Are they? Because I was very careful about how I worded that email. I never claimed to have direct evidence of anything. I simply shared concerns that had been brought to my attention by unnamed sources. Very difficult to prove malicious intent in that kind of language. He'd thought this through more carefully than I'd given him credit for. The email was probably worded in a way that gave him plausible deniability while still achieving his goal of creating problems for me. What do you want, Tyler? I want you to call Digital Horizon tomorrow morning and provide the reference we discussed. I want you to focus on my abilities and potential rather than getting bogged down in recent setbacks. And I want you to help me rebuild my professional reputation instead of tearing it down. And if I don't, then I guess we'll see how thorough Pinnacle's investigation really is. I might remember additional details about our conversations. Other people might come forward with concerns about your professional conduct. These things have a way of snowballing once they get started.
The threat was explicit now. Tyler was prepared to escalate his false accusations if I didn't give him what he wanted. He'd weaponized our friendship and his knowledge of my professional situation to create a hostage scenario where helping him commit fraud was presented as the only way to protect myself. I need time to think about this, I said. You have until noon tomorrow. Digital Horizon is expecting to hear from you by the end of business, and I'd hate for any additional concerns about your conduct to surface before then. Tyler hung up, leaving me alone with the realization that my former best friend had become something I'd never imagined possible, a calculating manipulator who was willing to destroy my life to get what he wanted. The person I'd thought I knew for 15 years had revealed himself to be someone entirely different, someone capable of sustained, methodical cruelty in service of his own interests. But Tyler had made one crucial miscalculation. He assumed that fear would compel me to give in to his demands, that the threat to my career would override my principles. He was about to learn that some lines, once crossed, change everything irrevocably. I spent that night staring at the ceiling, weighing my options. Tyler's ultimatum echoed in my mind. Provide the false reference by noon or face escalating accusations that could destroy my career. The rational part of me knew that giving in would only enable his behavior and potentially make me complicit in defrauding Digital Horizon. But the pragmatic part whispered that one phone call could end this nightmare and protect everything I'd worked to build. By morning, I'd made my decision. Instead of going straight to work, I drove to the law offices of Peterson & Associates downtown. My college roommate Jake Peterson had become an employment attorney, and while we only spoke a few times a year, I knew he'd give me honest advice about my situation. Jake listened without interruption as I laid out the entire timeline. Tyler's fraudulent resume, his termination, his escalating demands for a reference, and finally, his anonymous accusations to my employer. When I finished, Jake leaned back in his chair and whistled softly. Marcus, this is textbook workplace harassment and potential extortion. Tyler is using threats to try to compel you to commit fraud on his behalf. But could his accusations actually damage my career, even if they're false? In the short term, absolutely. Even unfounded allegations create problems, investigations, documentation in your HR file, potential damage to professional relationships. But the good news is that Tyler has left a clear evidence trail of his harassment. Jake pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. Those text messages demanding references, the documented timeline of his termination for fraud, the suspicious timing of the anonymous email right after you refused to help him, it all paints a picture of retaliatory harassment. So what should I do? Document everything, but don't engage with Tyler anymore. Let your company's investigation proceed and consider filing a police report for harassment. Most importantly, don't give him that reference, no matter what he threatens. The moment you make that call, you become complicit in fraud.
I left Jake's office feeling more confident about my decision, but also more aware of how seriously Tyler's behavior had escalated beyond personal conflict into potential criminal activity. At Pinnacle, I found Sandra waiting with an update on the investigation. Digital Horizon had confirmed that no one from Pinnacle had contacted them about Tyler Walsh, which contradicted the specific claims in the anonymous email. More importantly, they'd revealed that Tyler had been telling them for weeks that his reference from Pinnacle was traveling and temporarily unavailable. "So he's been using your name without permission this entire time," Sandra said. Digital Horizon is understandably concerned about proceeding with a candidate whose primary reference appears to be uncooperative or non-existent. Have they withdrawn their offer? Not yet, but they've given Tyler until today to provide alternative references or explain the discrepancy. Apparently, he's been quite insistent that you'll be calling them. I felt a grim satisfaction knowing that Tyler's deadline pressure was coming from Digital Horizon's growing impatience, not just his own desperation. His web of lies was finally collapsing under its own weight. At 11:47 a.m., 13 minutes before Tyler's self-imposed deadline, my phone rang. "Time's running out, Marcus," Tyler said without preamble. "Digital Horizon called me an hour ago, asking where your reference call is. I told them you'd definitely be calling before noon." "Then you lied to them again. I gave you a chance to do this the easy way. If you don't make that call in the next 10 minutes, I'm sending a follow-up email to Sandra with additional details about our conspiracy. I've been remembering more specifics about the coaching sessions where you helped me prepare for the Pinnacle interview."
Coaching sessions that never happened. Can you prove they never happened? Because I have very detailed memories of conversations in your apartment where you helped me craft responses to potential interview questions. I remember the Chinese takeout we ordered while working on my portfolio presentation. Tyler was adding layers of fabricated detail to make his accusations seem more credible. The mention of Chinese takeout was particularly insidious. We'd ordered Chinese food countless times over the years, so there would be evidence of those orders in our shared history, even if none of them were related to interview preparation. You're describing normal conversations between friends and retroactively claiming they were criminal conspiracies. I'm describing the truth as I remember it, and my memory might get even more detailed if you don't make that phone call. I looked at the clock on my computer screen. 11:51 a.m. "Tyler, I'm not making the call." "Then you're making a huge mistake." "Maybe, but it's my mistake to make." "Fine, don't say I didn't warn you." Tyler hung up, and I spent the next hour waiting for the other shoe to drop. At 1:15 p.m., Sandra appeared at my desk again. "Another email?" I asked. "No, actually. Something much more interesting." She was holding a different set of papers, and her expression was grimmer than before. Digital Horizon called me directly. Apparently, Tyler gave them my contact information and claimed I had additional insights about his work performance that might help with their decision. "What did you tell them?" I told them the truth, that Tyler Walsh was terminated from Pinnacle Digital Solutions for falsifying his employment history, and that I would not recommend him for any position requiring honesty and integrity. I felt a wave of relief mixed with vindication. How did they react? They were extremely grateful for the information. Apparently, Tyler had been pressuring them to make a decision quickly, claiming he had other offers pending. They'd been feeling rushed and hadn't completed their usual due diligence. So they withdrew the offer? Immediately. But here's where it gets interesting. Sandra sat down in the chair next to my desk. Digital Horizon asked me specifically about you because Tyler had been so insistent that you would provide a positive reference. When I explained that you had explicitly refused to provide any references, they mentioned something curious. What? Tyler had given them a backup plan. He said if you weren't available, they could contact someone named Michael Torres, who had worked with both of you on several projects. He provided a phone number and email address. I'd never heard of Michael Torres. That's not a real person. We figured as much. Digital Horizon tried the number yesterday. It goes to a voicemail with a generic message. But here's the really interesting part.
The email address is registered to the same IP address as Tyler's personal accounts. The implications hit me immediately. Tyler had created a fake reference, complete with false identity and contact information, as a backup plan for when I refused to help him. He'd been prepared to impersonate a fictional colleague to support his fraudulent application. That's identity fraud. Among other things, Digital Horizon is considering filing a report with the FBI's Internet Complaints Center. Creating false identities for employment fraud is a federal offense. Sandra handed me the printed emails showing Tyler's Michael Torres persona. The fake reference was detailed and sophisticated, describing collaborative projects and professional accomplishments that sounded plausible but were entirely fictional. There's more, Sandra continued. After Digital Horizon withdrew their offer, Tyler called them back claiming there had been a misunderstanding. He accused them of contacting you and me without his permission and threatened to sue them for interfering with his employment prospects. He threatened to sue Digital Horizon for doing reference checks? Apparently, he claimed they had violated his privacy by contacting previous employers without explicit written consent. Complete nonsense legally, but it shows how far he's willing to go to blame everyone but himself for the consequences of his behavior. I stared at the evidence of Tyler's escalating deception, trying to reconcile the calculating fraudster described in these documents with the friend I'd known since middle school. The Tyler I'd grown up with had been impulsive and sometimes irresponsible, but this level of methodical dishonesty felt like it belonged to a completely different person.
Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.